So my first question I wanted to ask you was just generally about, well, I'm going to read you this statement, which is on the website, okay? It says, the bishop's office is responsible for the spiritual well-being of Catholics in South Georgia, as well as the day-to-day administration of the Diocese of Savannah. So that is a big job description. So how have you approached that responsibility? How did you approach it when you were just getting started? What are your thoughts on that in terms of how you've managed the demands of these two areas, especially since they often require different skill sets? And it says you're responsible for the spiritual well-being of Catholics in South Georgia. That's the outcome. That's big.
And that's very big, but I want to see how I will word it. When you're made a bishop, you realize that you're going to be the father of the diocesan family. But you have lots and lots of people who are also in the same type of ministry of serving the needs of the people. So the key to any bishop and his ministry to his people are his priests of the diocese, the permanent deacons, and all of the other people in all the parishes who enrich their life and the lives of their parishes every day by what they say and what they do. I often thought of it when I'm saying Mass at the cathedral in all its glory there, which is a very beautiful thing to do in such a beautiful setting. I'm very conscious that when I give that Mass, give the blessing at the end of Mass, I'm kind of mentally thinking of Donaldsonville and Bainbridge and Augusta and Macon, and saying this Mass has been celebrated all over this diocese today in the ministry of the priesthood, of which I am part. And in the priesthood I've become a bishop, designated by the church in this kind of supervisory role or leadership role. And so obviously without all of that I could not do it. It would be impossible. I'm not a one-man show. I'm representing the church in the ministry of bishops, but in cooperation with especially the priests throughout the diocese.
So I also happened to be at Sacred Heart when you did a surprise Mass with us earlier this year, when you had been traveling for the weekend and got to the 6 o'clock Mass, and nobody knew you were coming. It was really delightful. And I remember so vividly your homily about traveling all over to all these really remote places, and I wanted to ask you, and it's in there later on. By the way, we're not doing this in a row. We're just going to talk, but these are the points. How do you stay in touch with Bainbridge, and how do you stay in touch with Donaldsonville and, Kathleen and these little places? And how then ministering to these places that are so remote, and then you also have such urban inner city parishes also, so how does that all come into play?
First of all, I would want to say that traveling the diocese to all of these people, I would find it as an integral and essential role of the bishop. That you visit your family as often as you can. Granted, now this is 37,000 square miles, but they're part of your family. One of my primary accesses to a lot of the family is when I celebrate the sacrament of confirmation. Now, that's only a tiny part of any parish community, but it brings together a significant number of families together with their sponsors, their parents, their grandparents, and invariably people from other parts of the United States who have come to see perhaps their grandchild being confirmed. So that gives me direct access, that particular sacrament, when I confirm people in the faith. I had a friend of mine one time ask me, Bishop, this is physically very demanding on you, why don't you delegate a priest to go to Columbus and Bainbridge and Albany and all those faraway places? I said, no, I cannot do that. They want the bishop. It's not that they want me as a person, but they need the role of the bishop. And if I never went there, I would feel I was doing them a disservice. Not that the sacrament could not be celebrated by people, I would delegate. But there are occasions when the bishop needs to be present with his family.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that enriched me greatly. Like, I was as much enriched by that going there as they were.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes into play also.
So a couple of things you've mentioned. Let's talk about your spiritual, personal enrichment in this process. How have you, during your time as bishop, maintained your relationship with God?
Which obviously, if that's not there, you're kind of a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the continuum, I would say, from being a priest to being a bishop, I was a priest for 30 years or so when I was made a bishop, is a continuum of making sure that you're faithful to prayer life,
Mm-hmm.
that you're faithful to saying daily mass, and
do you say mass every day?
yes, and getting spiritual advisement and having a confessor to go to celebrate that sacrament. They are absolutely essential. And I was, to be honest with you, I was scared to death when I was asked to be a bishop, because I realized immediately, wow, when I lie down on that floor, I'm going to be made a bishop. Unless have some meaning in my life, it's going to be, it scared me. I must become much more conscious of my obligations.
Mm-hmm.
My responsibility is so much bigger in serving these people that I must make sure that I hold on to my spiritual life.
Did you wonder if you could handle it?
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you think you've done?
Well, I've grown into it, and I've grown into enjoying it, and I've also came to a very gratifying realization of the support that I got from the priests and people. That I was not in this alone, and that they were so helpful, so cooperative. If you can imagine, I was dealing with a presbyterate, as we call it, that I knew very well, and they knew me very well. And that scares you. I'm now becoming their bishop, so this is a different relationship automatically. In a sense, I'm their spiritual superior. I'm the one who's going to be asking them, I want you to go to this parish instead of that parish. I want you to do this and this. It has, for 16 years, with very few exceptions, the absolutely total cooperation. Yeah.
So that is interesting, going from being their peers. I mean, they knew your foibles, and
correct. They still do.
You were just another buddy in the group, and
correct.
then all of a sudden you've got this. Wow.
Yeah.
So
all credit to them. All credit to them. They.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you have done, or that have occurred, and that were initiatives of yours during your time here. Some of the examples that I'm just going to rattle through, and you can just randomly hit on. Initiating the Bishop Gartland Award, the restoration of the cathedral, the 150th anniversary of the diocese. I'm calling this mission expansion. It seems like there's been a huge expansion of new parishes and new buildings in parishes, whether they are churches themselves or parish centers. The growth of the Hispanic ministry. I'm not sure if this was your thing or if this came from Bishop Lessard, but the Office of African American Ministry, I believe, was started. And then evangelism to new and lapsed Catholics. The Catholics Come Home campaign being most recent in my mind with that. And then any other key initiatives that you are proud of. So some random comments on some of those things.
Okay, we'll start maybe with the renovation of the cathedral and the Gartland Award, and in some ways they're kind of interconnected. I have not a passion, but I have what would I call it? I've kind of an abiding interest in the historical dimension of the age we live in and the age that we've come from, and being part of the Diocese of Savannah, which is one of the older dioceses in the southeastern part of the United States, dating from 1850, I became very conscious of the people who went before me and their contribution, because I can readily say anything I was going to do was built on the shoulders of my 13 predecessors, and that I was only a cog in the wheel, and I was wondering how long that cog would be there and another cog would come to keep it going. So you're kind of part of a larger historical picture. With regard to the restoration of the cathedral, I became a bishop in '95, and I guess it was brought to my attention. I was very conscious of the need and how blessed we were, let's put it that way, to have such a magnificent cathedral. Not every diocese is so blessed, especially newer dioceses that are cut off of older dioceses, and they don't know whether to build one or to keep going in this day and age. Here we have inherited one from like the 1870s, and then burned to the ground and rededicated in 1900, and that's always a mystery to me. The marvelous people of that age to build a structure like we have today, and
with the technology they didn't have that we just take for granted.
Correct, right. So after discussing it, like with some of the rector and some of the other people, I indicated I would like to have a diocesan drive to restore the cathedral, and we had a study done, and we brought in a leadership group with regard to fundraising, and like the rest is history. A bit mixed in a way. We had the drive. That was very, very... that's the other thing I became conscious of, because I was pastor in Columbus, Georgia for 12 years when I was made a bishop. And being made pastor there when I was made a bishop was probably one of the best things that happened to me in becoming the bishop of the diocese. Because up to that I spent all of my time in Savannah or nearby, or 2 years in Augusta. But I had no knowledge of the rest of the diocese until I went 250 miles away to Columbus. And I was there for 12 years when I was appointed bishop. And of course they were very proud of the fact that their pastor was made a bishop. But while I was in Columbus, the big challenge was to identify your parish with the diocese. And there was many of the things that I did and tried to cooperate with the diocese. I brought the people to Savannah on various occasions so that they could identify with what I call the diocesan family. Remember now, in Columbus you're only 100 miles from Atlanta.
Right.
You're 250 miles or so from Savannah. So it was a hard draw.
Yes.
But we did things that did help, and it gradually got what I call an essential picture of the diocesan family, because that's how Catholics practice their faith, within the context of their bishop and priest as a spiritual family, which has got geographical boundaries. In our case, they're very spread out, which makes it demanding.
It's an unusual situation.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think there's just listening to what you're saying about that, being a lifelong Savannian with a little bit of a time in the middle where I lived away, but we get Savannah focused around here really fast, and we forget that the world does not stop at the Chatham County line. So being in Columbus made you more aware of the remoteness, obviously, of some of the parishes out there. So how, sort of the flip side of that question is, how do you get Savannah Catholics to be connected with these remote parishes?
Okay, good point. Well, first of all, the drive for the thing was $10 million. It went to $15 million. The cost overruns in the cathedral were quite extensive because we discovered in our process that we to do things that we never expected. So ultimately we had to borrow a lot of money to finish the project, which had to be finished once we got it.
Right.
But as I speak to you today, the total indebtedness today, and it was reopened 12 years ago, 11 years ago, is now like $225,000, which
wow,
is very
that's
little.
Nothing. That's quite an accomplishment.
So it will be paid off in the next year or two, type of thing. However, that project, then we had a beautiful dedication ceremony at the end of October 2000, and we were able to publicize the fact this is how the diocesan family supported this project. And in a very nice way, I was able to remind the people of Chatham County, the people of Columbus, of Macon, of Brunswick, of Valdosta, and all the little places. Every one of them contributed to this place. So this is their church as much as it is your church. And we all have an obligation to make sure of its future and its maintenance and its upkeep, and that people from all of these outlying places are as welcome here as you are. You know? It just so happens that you live here geographically. And so that helped those parishes out there to recognize the Mother Church and the cathedral. But also, you said it better than I said it myself. People from Savannah can be they can be what I call, in a very beautiful way, isolated with what they have, but not realizing the extent of the diocese outside themselves. I don't know whether you want to put this in here or not. When I was a pastor, I've shared that with some of the staff. When I was a pastor in St. Anne's in Columbus, as say compared with being a pastor in a parish in Savannah, Georgia, I found it much more flexible. I found them to be much more flexible in trying to do programs than I would in Savannah, where, not through any fault of their own, they're all very, very good people, but their mindset was different. You know, well, don't we have enough here, and we okay, you know, and that type of thing. Whereas the people in Columbus, Georgia, were from all over the United States, with Fort Benning and other military, a lot of core group, but then a lot of people from other areas. And the more you mix where people come from, the more ideas you get, and it develops a kind of a flexibility in your mindset. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an interesting cultural phenomenon that Savannah has outside of the church too.
Oh yeah, outside. Oh yes, sure.
Yes, it's reflective of that. So I thought it was interesting when I was reading about the fund drive to restore the cathedral, and also that was linked not only to the 150th anniversary of the diocese, but that you also linked the Hispanic ministry to that.
Right.
So I thought that was very smart.
Right.
I was thinking, you know, I bet that if he had just done a Hispanic ministry, the money would not have come in quite so solidly.
Right.
So, good job.
Yeah, that was deliberate. Yeah. When you do a private, first of all, we had the best as far as the local church. You couldn't, other than building a new parish church, that is the easiest thing to raise money for. If you're in a parish and you're going to build a new church, they'll buy into that. People, if you're looking for money to pay off a debt, why did you get into debt? You know, what was the reason for it? So the cathedral, I think there were 6 items in that drive. If I went back and looked at it, I know we folded the bishop's annual appeal into it that 1 year. A mistake, by the way, but we did it. So I found out later on, every diocese that tried to do that, they played catch up the following years of trying to get it back on track again.
Gosh.
And we made some allowances for parishes that if they went over their goal, they were able to apply that excess to the bishop's annual appeal for the next 3 years or something. It became a logistic nightmare.
Oh dear.
So, but anyhow.
Yes.
But yes, the Hispanic ministry was in there also to verify, and as a kind of a catechetical reminder, where there's a changing dynamic going on before our eyes, and it has continued and continues to this day. Yeah.
So that has really been something that has happened in the 15 and a half years that you've been bishop.
Correct. Right.
So how have you specifically looked at that within the framework of the diocese, and then with I seem to recall that you and the Archbishop from Atlanta sent out a letter about the new Georgia immigration law that went into play. Can you just talk about some of those things?
Well, first of all, as far as pastoral care of the migrants, most of whom are Hispanic, there is kind of policy now with all our seminarians that as far as possible they all have to be bilingual by the time they're ordained. So during the summers they may go to summer school in Mexico or some other place to learn Spanish. For the most part it's working. Like the 2 priests I ordained this year are both bilingual, and so not all of them. Obviously some people have a great difficulty in learning a second language. To go back, then the whole social gospel of the church came into play, because so many of the migrants are not documented properly, the vast majority of them. And like both Archbishop Gregory and myself and the bishops of the United States, not just the 2 of us, for the most part we're constantly pushing the federal government to bring out comprehensive legislation that will cover this situation, not to be getting into the mess that we're getting into now with local states taking it on, because the federal government, who has the primary responsibility for guarding the borders and the primary responsibility for establishing the criteria by which people come into this country. And why we can't do that, because this country is built in immigrants. This country is born of immigrants. I'm always also I'm an immigrant. You know, an immigrant who became a citizen within 5 years, which was the regulation at that time, of coming here, because I wanted to be able to talk as a citizen, especially in my ministry as a priest. I often said they can't tell me go home, you know, because I am a citizen and like proud of it, you know.
Yes.
And but I emphasize I could go on and on about this, because we have so many very poor people. I've often told people that the more immigrants I meet as I go from parish to parish, I am meeting a fine, outstanding group of people, 99% of them. They're trying to do one thing: fulfill a basic human obligation of making money to help your family. And why are we coming down on them so hard when that's all they're trying to do, you know? And to say they're not paying taxes is wrong. They're buying food, they pay taxes. They do this, they pay taxes. Many of them probably are getting paid and their social security has been taken out, even though, and they'll never see a penny of that money. So, in their own way. So, it all goes back to me. Why? I think of the weeks and weeks and weeks we've spent up there and about the lifting the ceiling of the debt limit, and we've not done 1 ounce of work on immigration. You know, we nearly had one, as you know, a couple of years ago with Senator Kennedy. God be good to him, he's now died, and it was on the verge of very strong support. But it was canned, I think, shortly. It didn't make it off the floor or something. So.
Now, as bishop, do you personally do any visits to elected officials?
Not that much, but I will. Like I've been trying to set up a meeting with Johnston. What's his name?
Eric Johnson? No.
Not Eric. I know Eric, but the representative of the U.S. He lives in the Isle of Hope.
Oh, Jack Kingston.
Jack Kingston. Right. Jack Kingston. Yeah. The reason I want to meet with Jack Kingston is that I serve on the Catholic Relief Services Board. Right. And I've gone to Africa twice, Zimbabwe one time, and the other time to Nigeria. And the CRS board, since that's primarily the arm of the bishops for overseas relief, Jack Kingston serves on that, the equivalency board of the United States that gives overseas relief. And on analysis, the amount of money the United States gives out of its total budget, I think, is was 1% or less, and they want to cut back on that. And my effort would be small type of effort, but at least to tell him. We've talked before about the CRS because he has visited Africa and has come across to work at the CRS, and he's very, very moved by it and what good work they do, you know. So that would be just what you call an intervention on this level to see, you know, what he does in the national level. Yeah. So I do it in that level, but I don't do that much of it.
Right.
Yeah. Would like to do more of it. It's a part of the role, I think, of a spiritual leader in a way, to be involved in the bigger picture and outside your diocese, you know. And I've been blessed to be able to do that. Like going to Zimbabwe and Nigeria and Indonesia. They're the 2 trips I made for 3 trips. In Indonesia, I went to visit the place where the tsunami hit, up in the very tip of Bond Aceh, where that tsunami came in at 30 feet of water with another rolling in on top of it, another 10 feet, and it came about 3 or 4 miles inland in the space of about 5 minutes, you know.
How long after the tsunami were you there?
Well, it was about 2.5 years or so when the CRS had replaced or replenished, built hundreds of homes for lots of the families who were dislocated. And the purpose of that trip was to visit those homes and to hand them over officially to some of the families that were getting them, with a kind of a special ceremony in the townland where they put up a stage and they all dressed in native dress and a big celebration. And Ken Hackett, the president of CRS, he and I were together on that trip, and they would recognize us and thank us for all of this. Now, the marvelous thing about that trip, Indonesia is about 98% Muslim, I think. Well, you would never know it, I can tell you, from the way they treated us. And CRS built compounds over there to do the work. You know, you had to have a place where you brought in the machinery, the workers to live. Most of the workers were contractors, were Muslim, but they also built a prayer house for them so as they could practice their faith. Well, you know.
Well, let's talk a little bit about interfaith relationships.
Yeah.
That was one of the things in the 50th anniversary of your ordination.
I must go back to some of all that stuff we were doing too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the 50th anniversary of your, you had Rabbi Belzer said that you were a mensch, which means a good guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and I saw that they had, and John Finley, and I was reflecting upon within the Christian sects, if you will, the comments that we've already talked about in your homily about, celebrating where we've come from in our faith journey. So can you talk about your role in interfaith relations locally and on the national scale?
Yeah, well, locally, let's put it, first of all, as a pastor, when I was at Blessed Sacrament here in Savannah, when I was St. Anne's, we used to have, not that much, but we did have, usually around Thanksgiving, an interfaith gathering where the people would come together, and we'd have a prayer service, and we'd rotate the sermon, who'd give the sermon and things like that. And I also did that in St. Anne's in Columbus in a very kind of a more extensive way. Now, what that did is, first of all, you got your own constituents or your own parishioners who got to know parishioners of the other churches. And sometimes that led to kind of a socialization that didn't exist before. With regard to the ministers, it evolved into kind of a social contact, which you did not have before. So that if anything came up or someone of their parishioners came to me and they were having difficulty in that church, and they did not know their minister, I was able to refer them back to them, or I could call up the minister. But other than that, I did not do much. It was kind of making personal contact. And here in the Savannah area, both as a pastor and as a bishop, I've become friends with these people, friends who would greet each other. We could sit down and chat with each other and that type of thing, which is a very healthy type of thing. It's not the biggest thing in the world. We're not having we had the Savannah Deanery sponsored out of Benedictine, I remember, a very well-known Muslim speaker to come in and a lot of the parishioners from different parishes in Savannah went to what we call a deanery. It was an inter-parochial type of thing. And that was like very, very well attended. But it's usually attended by people who have a kind of a yen for that type of thing, an interest in it, you know what I mean?
Yes.
The everyday walk of life of the parishioner is going to Mass on Sunday, they're taking care of their kids, and what the First Baptist is doing is not of massive interest to them, if you know what I mean. So
I understand that.
Yeah.
Well, this is my assessment, perhaps the biggest thing historically that happened in the United States during the time you were bishop was 9/11, and talking about interfaith relationships. It seems to me that the understanding or lack thereof of understanding of the Islamic faith, well, it got a higher profile and it changed a lot after the result of that. So how have you factored that into your work?
Well, I find prior to 9/11, by the way, I was in Washington, D.C. when 9/11 happened.
Oh, really?
I had to drive home, I remember, all the airports are closed, and I was lucky to be able to rent a car.
I bet.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
Now, when we restored the cathedral, one of the people who worked on the pitched roof, putting up was an imam. He was a Muslim. He and Monsignor O'Neill got to be very, very good friends, and they would kid each other about their respective faiths, and it was a very, very healthy relationship. I will invite to the ordination of the new bishop at least one imam to show our regard for their faith, and so on and so forth. So I guess we've become more conscious that where we would automatically say on affairs that were broader than ourselves, like in the ordination of a new bishop, is that where we would definitely invite the Episcopal bishop, the superintendent of the Methodist Church. We will invite the Baptists. Are always very difficult because they're all kind of separate congregations and they don't have a central authority here. So, but I'm very good friends with John Finlay of the First Baptist Church, so he'll be our designated hitter for the Baptists. And but now we would always include an imam too.
So there seems to be.
And if you remember, one of their houses of prayer was fireballed a couple of years ago, I remember, and some of the local, including myself, came out condemning the act and saying that. And I think offering them some financial help or something.
So let's talk a little bit about the Bishop Gartland Award and the Office of African American Ministry.
Yeah, the African American, that was established by Bishop Lassard, so if you want to leave that there, you can.
The Gartland Award, you did.
The Gartland Award, yes, definitely. The Gartland Award was basically, we kind of coordinated with the 150th anniversary of the diocese. I said, I have this yen for celebrating these events, or using the historical moment to do something that you can build on. And one of those moments was the re-establishment or the reopening of the cathedral, just closed for about a year and a half, and then establishing this award, Gartland Award. And at the back of my mind, this was one great way that I could bring people together from every parish in the diocese, because it's designed in such a way that the pastor selected whatever way he wanted. He was his parish council or just his own initiative. A maximum of 2 people. He could not have more than 2, because I looked upon it as an annual event. And they could be Catholic or non-Catholic.
Really?
Yes. So we've had some non-Catholics, and what I had in mind there, we've had someone like a housekeeper in a parish who might have worked there for 30 or 40 years.
Yes.
And we could recognize them in a very significant way as contributing to the overall life of the diocesan family. I use that as an example because it's the one that came to mind. I'd say the vast majority of the people who get the award are Catholic. Also, they had to be volunteers. Like, I'm not saying that sometimes paid staff did not get the award, but that was not the idea.
Right.
These were people who were volunteering. So it's called after Bishop Gartland, the first bishop of Savannah, and that fit the profile perfectly because he was only bishop for 4 years. I wear his ring, by the way.
Really?
First bishop of Savannah.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
So that dates from 1854. That's the year he died. So it's 161 years old.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
And part of the ceremony, but I'm devising this myself, part of the ceremony of the new bishop, the ordination bishop, is he's presented with his ring and he puts it on. So I'm going to take off this ring and put it on his finger.
Oh, that's going to be lovely.
So, and then I'll have to get another ring myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I could be one of the only dioceses in the United States. That's a bit of hyperbole because I don't know the facts. But when I tell other bishops about it, they're fascinated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not there when I became. It was there when I became a bishop, but the archivist found it in the archives and came to me one day. Maybe I was about 3 years a bishop, and I was wearing a kind of a ring that friends gave me when I was our friends of the family,
Mm-hmm.
and the person who was making it died, and his assistant kind of botched it up a little. It's not that attractive, but it was my ring now. So then this Jill Brown, the archivist, came to me and said, "We found this ring, and it's engraved. That's how we know it's bishop. It's engraved with his name, so it's definitely his ring."
That is incredible, and they just had it stuck someplace.
Stuck in a place in the archives with a couple of more rings from former bishops, I think.
Oh my goodness!
Yes, it was not even secured. You know, it was not in a vault. It was not in.
That's funny.
So initially, I said it fitted me then perfectly, and then I used to wear it on big days: Christmas, Pentecost, Easter, ordination ceremony, maybe, or something. And then I would take it off and give it to Monsignor O'Neill, and I said, "Put that in the safe until I need it again." Then after a while, I got tired of that. I said, "This ring is safer on my finger than any other place." So here it is.
It seems more appropriate to wear it every day too, because it implies that what you're doing on the other days is not as important
Correct.
as
Right. Yeah.
you know.
Oh yes, sure. And it's talking about connectedness with history. Look, you're looking at it right there.
Right. Absolutely. So he's sort of reprimanding you every time you look at your hand.
Yes,
there it is.
In fact, I told the staff, I said, when we were planning this, I said, "I'm going to do this." And I said, "This is the one big thing I'll miss," as I give it to him, you know.
Yes.
But it's appropriate, so appropriate. Now, not everyone is taken with it like I am, you know, of that connectedness.
But it's important.
Yeah.
So Mike Johnson told me that Bishop Gartland died ministering to yellow fever.
Correct, right. So he was in service to his people. He died, got the disease himself, and died. He was only 49 years of age, and he came from Philadelphia. And at that time, you can imagine.
I can't imagine.
1850. You know, I was walking along Liberty Street the other day, and I saw a house that was built in 1853, and it's got this historical marker on it. I said, "Wow, that house." Probably none of these houses were here. It's just in the shadow of the cathedral when our diocese was established. You know, there would have been dirt roads and probably about 5,000 Catholics in the whole diocese. You know,
but
maybe
the city was so small that was quite a large group, and that yellow fever epidemic, it killed off a huge number of people.
Huge number of people, yeah.
Percentage-wise, as well.
There were two bishops died within, I think, 10 days of each other. There was another Bishop Barron, who was from Philadelphia, who was the Bishop of New Guinea, that stretch of the West African coast that includes Liberia, and he came from there and was on vacation in Philadelphia. Bishop Gartland was his friend. He says, "I'll come down and help you." He also got the yellow fever. So they died 10 days. They're both buried at the Catholic cemetery, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So he's buried in Savannah?
He's buried in Savannah, yeah.